Hi, everyone. My name is Doug Dunbar. I'm with CBS 11 News. Been in North Texas for the better part of 17 years. And more than that, anchoring the news at CBS 11, I have been a lover of the stories of our military heroes, both present, but also a deep love of those in the past. And veterans a big deal for me, in part because I'm a Gold Star son. Lost my dad in Vietnam back in 1969. My mom and I made our way through life and figured things out, but losing someone in the military was horribly difficult. But at the same time, we were surrounded over the years by the family that is the military. And I think that has, as I wandered into my career here in journalism, has allowed me to use the voice that I do have to now share the stories of our military heroes who have given so much of themselves over the years and the decades. And it's an honor for me to share so many stories, including the one that we're going to talk about in this video. And when I say that, there are a lot of men and women who have served this country and done so so beautifully. But rare do you get to talk to a World War II veteran, because there's far too many of them left. Last count that was given to me, roughly 16,000 left in the state of Texas from World War II, or maybe nationwide, but 16,000 is the number living today. But we know that they're very up there in age, most in their 90s now. And even more rare are speaking with World War II heroes who are former prisoners of war at the same time. And that's where I want to bring in the gentleman who we're going to speak with today, my friend, I'm glad to say, who I met a few years ago at CB Perdue. We met doing a story about you. It is good to see you again.
Well, thank you.
You look good. 95 years young?
Yes, sir. 95.
And how are you feeling?
I'm feeling fine. I don't have any particular ailments that I have to do, but I do go to the doctor frequently because he has to check me over and make sure, but that probably helps me out. But I'm doing good.
CB, you're a veteran of World War II. You served in Korea and also a former prisoner of war. You, my friend, are someone who has life lessons that I'm grateful that you have shared, not only with your family, but friends, and then through the story that we got to tell on CBS 11 with your service and your former prisoner of war status. And it all surrounds the B-17. So what I'd love to do is dive into a discussion with you. But for those watching the video, if you would indulge me, I'd like to begin revisiting the story that you and I did together. Good. And then after that, you and I can sit and chat a little bit. Would that be good for you?
Be good.
Okay. So let's sit and enjoy, because it's been a while since I've seen it, the story of CB Perdue.
It's a good one.
Well, we often bring you stories of reunions, usually between long-lost friends or family members. But tonight, it's a man and his airplane. The last time CB Perdue was this close to a B-17 bomber, he was bailing out 20,000 feet over northern Germany during World War II. Tonight, CBS 11's Doug Dunbar shows us how 67 years later, he is airborne one last time in his beloved B-17.
Looks familiar. It sure does.
Climbing on board the Collings Foundation B-17, nicknamed the 909, CB Perdue is instantly transported back to April 7th, 1945.
We were on a mission to bomb an airfield north of Hamburg.
See bombs hanging in here like this? I've looked at that many times.
That day, CB was on his 25th mission, flying for the Army Air Force, and just 20 years old.
I was in the nose of the airplane in the place of a bombardier. This was my gun sight. It had twin 50 caliber machine guns.
All the gun turrets were manned during what was supposed to be nothing but a milk run, an easy mission. But out of nowhere, a German fighter.
He came up to the rear of us and shot the tail of our B-17 off. I felt something hit the plane like that.
In seconds, that milk run became a run for their lives to the escape hatch, where only CB and 4 others on that crew of 9 got out.
And I cleared the plane and pulled my parachute.
It's that hatch that allowed CB to be here today.
This is where I jumped out.
Along with his great-grandson, Parker. When CB bailed out back in 1945, This is the jacket that he was wearing. He still has it. In this USA that was handwritten on the front of the jacket, that was done by the Germans to identify him as a prisoner of war, along with his Stalag Luft 1 dog tags. After his capture, Perdue was taken to Hamburg, Germany for interrogation, then to Stalag 1 in Barth, and held as a POW until liberation. His official mission sheet ends with "Missing on Ship, April 7th, 1945. That's the last time he flew in a B-17, until now.
This is where I stood all the time whenever I was flying.
Switches are off. Ignition masters. 2 on. Turning 2. Number 2.
For the first time since the bailout, World War II hero C.B. Perdue roars skyward in a B-17.
You kind of fall in love with them a little bit. That's what kept you going.
The flight to honor this 87-year-old American hero went from Love Field to Waco. It was enough time to man the nose turret one last time, share stories with his great-grandsons, and reflect on a proud service to country.
These doors are open, and I'm looking down 20,000 feet or something.
Service that included a number of medals, including the Purple Heart, and finally, a reunion.
It means a lot to me.
67 years in the making.
In a way, it saved my life. Even though we got shot down, I got back. After flying 25 of those missions, I made it home.
Doug Dunbar, CBS 11 News.
Can you imagine the emotions that just being there? I mean, what it must have been like for him to get back in there and fly in that one more time.
Amazing.
I just can't even imagine.
Yeah.
What a nice story.
CB,
Yes.
you know what Karen just said, I want to ask you about, because that was a few years ago. That was so great seeing that story again. I remember that day. Tell me what you remember about that day when you got to fly in the B-17 again, and what Karen just talked about, the emotions. I'm just curious what you recall and what you recall feeling about that.
Well, it reminded me of the things that I had to do on a mission. They showed you the bomb rack in there, and one of my jobs was to check out the bombs whenever we were getting ready to go on a bomb run. And then I sat up front, probably most of the time more for observation than anything else, because there's a complete circle there of view from the front of the plane. Right. But it was just nice to see the old plane as I had seen it, climbed into it many a time, and I just, it just made me proud to see that old plane. Because it was quite a warrior, and was hard to knock out of the sky. But they did it. But nevertheless, it took some doing to do.
And you had family on board that airplane that we pointed out, and that had to be extraordinarily special to pass your story from your own mouth down generations in your own family.
Well, that's true. My wife, who was living then, she sat in the radio room. And it was a chair, a stool there, and I couldn't get her to get up and come up front where my position was. And my granddaughter, who's here now, she sat back a little further back from her grandmother, and I couldn't get her to come up and see out the window or come to look up front.
Right.
And my daughter Pam, she just had to sit in that seat that I rode all my missions on, and she sat down in that seat and looked out that front nose of the plane. She said, "I can't take this." She whirled around real quick and got off of my chair.
Wow.
It wasn't anything bad about it. It was just showing some of the things that I went through as I was on missions.
Right. If we could rewind a little bit for me. So when everything started for you, you're living on a farm, you're in Arkansas, you get drafted, Army Air Corps. Here we are, World War II. My understanding is prior to that moment, you had never even been out of the state of Arkansas, right?
No, that's correct. Never had ridden a train, but I did after that.
Right. What did it feel like going from your normal life, all of a sudden you're doing things you've never done before. You're going places you've never seen before. What was that like for you?
Well, it was kind of difficult to learn some terminology that the military used. For example, they say, okay, you guys line up here and march over this way to pick up the butts. Well, I didn't smoke, but the butts were cigarette butts that people would smoke and throw them on the ground. So they'd have us to walk along and pick up the cigarette butts that were there. But, you know, things like that. I never knew that kind of terminology, and going through the training that I had, and they all had various terms that they used for the kind of training we were doing. But you soon learn.
Right. How quick was it, CB, from when you entered the military to the point where you're in England and you're now based with a B-17? How long, what span of time was that?
Let's see. I had a period in there where I had some illness, so that delayed me getting into war. But I went in the military in July of 43 and got sick in early 44. About September or so of 44, the doctor says, I think you can go back to regular duty now. So I did. I was up at in Utah then. And so they sent me back to a unit to join a B-17 crew at Lincoln, Nebraska. And we went, there was a base that they used for training, for overseas training, they call it. And that was Rapid City, South Dakota. And from there, we picked up a brand new B-17 and took it to England, flew it to England. And as soon as we got there with it, well, they took it away from us and gave us the oldest plane they had in the unit. But it was a good one. But it was a time, several months passed by. I got over my illness that I had, and so I was put on a crew, and we took off. And our first, you see, after we arrived at our base at Nethershall, England, they were training for crews that were going to be flying missions. And of course, training there is a little different from the training you'd have in the States, where, you know, it's a different situation. But sure, over there, you had to know how they formed formations to put together a bomb group to head out for a target and things of that nature. But it didn't take us long to do it. I got there in December of 44, and I flew my first mission on the 9th of February of 45. And it started from there. Between February 9th of 45 and April 7, 45, I put in those 25 missions.
Wow.
They flew us pretty regular. Sometimes it'd be four days in a row we'd be flying a mission. And that wore on you pretty hard. I had a couple of long missions like to Berlin, and that's about 8 hours long on the B-17. But I just kept my mind on my work of doing on the bomb crew, doing my share of the work. And I tried to let that occupy my mind. I didn't go for one of these things of, how do I get out of doing this? We had a crew there and we worked and we got it done.
And were you, CB, because I've talked to so many World War II guys, from D-Day invasion, 06-30 on June 6th, all the way to guys like you who were toward the latter part of the war. Were you a guy who was all in and you wanted to be there and you wanted the action? And at the same time, was the crew you were working with on your B-17, what was the nature of how everybody felt about what you were doing?
Well, of course, the crew was from all different parts of the country. The pilot was from New York. One of the gunners was from Detroit. Of course, I was from Arkansas, and they were just scattered across the country, and they all come together, and we did things together. The crew stayed together if we was going somewhere, or for the most part, most of them would. The English people had a church right off of our base there, and we'd all get together and ride our bicycles down to the church to go to church. It was not difficult. I was drafted in, and I would never have volunteered, but it probably hurt my mom worse than it did my sisters or brothers and my dad. She was very, very disturbed that I was leaving to go to the war, and I accepted what I had to do. If I was to do a certain thing, I did it. Just, I didn't fight doing the job. And most of the guys on the crew was the same way. Once or twice we'd have a guy that we'd be flying what they call chaff, those strips of foil, and he was supposed to drop it out of the camera chute, and he didn't want to get down there where he'd be looking down to see what was down below him, about flying at about 18 to 20,000 feet. Anyway, one of the oldest guys on the crew says, you better drop that chaff out there. But he was a little more firm with him than I was. But he went on and did his job. He knuckled down and dropped it. And dropping that chaff would mess up the Germans' anti-aircraft radar to home in on it. I've seen the chaff going down, and you see an 88 millimeter shell blasting one of those bundles of chaff.
Wow.
So they had a job.
Yeah. But it sounds like everybody was committed for the most part.
They were.
Let's fast forward to that day in April, your 25th mission that we highlighted in the story.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to pick your brain about what you remember from that day. Where were you in the aircraft exactly when everything happened, and walk us through how everything unfolded in that moment when you guys got hit.
I can do that. My position for all of my missions was where the bombardier sat. I wasn't a trained bombardier, but not all of the planes flying had trained bombardiers. And the sites, the lead bombardier and deputy lead of a formation of about 12 to 16 planes, they're the ones that sighted the targets. And they had a signal to us. As soon as we saw the signal, we hit our button. And that's why they called us toggleiers. But many of the regular trained bombardiers did the same thing I did. But part of my job was whenever we were at altitude and we'd getting close to the target, not right close to it, but close enough that I was to go back and check the bomb load that we had, depending on what we were carrying that day, and to make sure that all the wires that was there for the fuses, that whenever the bomb went out, it pulled a wire out of a little propellant that makes that bomb go off. And I had to look for things like that, and wasn't a hard job. It was just checking. Well, to go do that, I had to put my parachute on and then get a walk around oxygen bottle and go back to the center rail going through the plane and look down in the bomb bay, see that everything was there and normal, nothing out of place, come back to my position. And whenever I came back to my position the day we got hit, I was nearly back to my position there in the nose, and I felt this jolt. And I knew we were hit. And the plane, it rose up, pilot gave it power, more power. Plane rose up and started turning this way. I surmised it was beginning a turn as it was going down. And if you stayed in the plane with it being circling like that, you can't get out of it. That centrifugal force would hold you in.
Right.
When we were hit, the tail gunner was in the tail. He went down with the tail. And the ball turret gunner, which was a good position, but it takes time to get in and out of the thing. So I think he went down with the tail also. And then the radio operator and the engineer, we don't know why they didn't get out. I saw pictures of later years where they had written pictures of these two guys, and they had written on that killed in action. Now, how they were killed or anything, because they had ample time to get out like the pilot and co-pilot did, and of course myself and the navigator. But and we know, and the waist gunner, you know, he got out with us, and I don't know how he made it, but he was the one that I asked him after we'd all got down on the ground. I said, what hit us? And he said, ME-262. Well, they didn't have any flying up there then. That was Germany's newest plane. And so all the years I went through thinking that's what knocked us out of the sky. But I never accepted the fact, because if it was from there, it would be a burst of power from that shell. But it wasn't. It was that thing, as I do my fist that way, I felt that. And as I was going back to my position after we were hit, I had to get my parachute on and everything. I just, to me, it was never there that's how we went down. But as you know, you've heard me explain about getting out of there, and the navigator, his position was up close to the front with me. He had gone to the escape door hatch, and he was trying to open it. And the procedure for opening that hatch was unlatch it. It was on the aft end of the door, and then there was two hinges on it, and pins in each hinge, and they had a strap attached to those hinge pins. You open the door, pull the pins out, and door flies off. Well, he was doing his best to get out all right, and he didn't go in that sequence. He went back in sequence. Well, once you get the hinge pins up, it's not going to fly. The door's not going to fly off. It had to be loose on that end, and that's when I got to him and I said, "Well, let me try it." He was flabbergasted at the time, and I reached in there. I was behind the bulkhead, and I couldn't do anything about the handle that he had already messed up there, and I reached and pulled on it. And I've always said that I don't know where I got the strength from to pull those hinge pins, because that door flew off just as soon as I pulled the hinge pins on it. So
all of this is happening in a span of what? 60 seconds, 90 seconds? I can't imagine.
Maybe 90 seconds, because if you stayed in the plane very long, you wouldn't get out, because it'd go a centrifugal force to get you. I'd say no more than a minute and a half, because we weren't long in getting that door open. And he bailed out first, the navigator, and I didn't ever see him floating down. We were at an altitude of 18,000 feet then, and I was right behind him. And I don't know how, with all the gear on, you know, the parachute, I had a chest pack, and that big old heavy jacket I show you. I went out, and I've always said, I don't know how I got out with all that stuff on me, but I did.
Wow.
And when I cleared the plane, I did what you wasn't supposed to do. Cleared the plane, I pulled that ripcord. My ultimate goal was to try to save my life. They taught us that you had to jump from a very high altitude, pull what they call a delayed jump. And that meaning you're not exposed to the enemy very long as you are going down.
Right.
Well, I just couldn't do that because saving my life was more on my mind than anything else. But as it turned out, it was fine. I pulled my ripcord and the chute came up like it was supposed to. And I floated down, but I had a problem in floating down. I let my feet dangle from the chute, and the chute would sway like this. And I looked once, and it swayed real high, and I was almost even with the top of that chute. Well, I knew if I got high enough to touch the canopy of the chute, possibility it would collapse. I found out if I pulled my feet up and hold them up, I'd quit swaying any. On the way down, there was a P-51 fighter, one of our fighters. He saw me and he circled me 2 times, not right up close to me, but out where he could see me. The Germans were noted for shooting at you if you were floating down in a parachute. So he circled me a couple of times, so that gave me protection for part of my trip down. And it seems like I drifted for a long time because I was pretty high up.
Let me interrupt you because I have to ask. So now you're floating down, and from even 15,000 feet pulling the chute, you're floating down a long time. That doesn't happen. What is going through your mind as you're floating down? You now know that you're alive. You know that your chute's good, but you know that you're going to float down in a place that they don't like you.
Correct. Yeah, really didn't.
What's going through your mind while you're floating down?
Well, Doug, I did what a lot of people would do. I say a prayer, and I even quoted a couple of biblical quotes that I could remember, what have you. I kept watching around me to see where I was coming down at, but that wouldn't help you any because I was too high in the air to tell where I was going to land. But as I got down lower, I could see people back under some trees because somebody was going to bomb an airfield that were near where I landed. It wasn't my target or my group. And when I hit the ground, hit it kind of hard, and my right leg kind of collapsed back under me and hurt my knee pretty bad. But this German soldier, Wehrmacht, he came, he had a rifle. He came up to me and was not aggressive. He just came up to me and he took my weapon. I had a shoulder holster with a .45 pistol in there. And no need in pulling that pistol because there's no place to run or hide. So he got my pistol. And while he was doing that, there was some German Hitler Youth. You've heard of that name, I know.
Absolutely.
They ran in, and they're trained to do this. They ran in, I guess it was about a half a dozen of them. And I'm guessing their age around 15, 16 maybe. And they started beating on me pretty good. But the soldier that took me captive, he got them off of me. And then he marched me on over to this airfield I mentioned, where they had a jail, and they locked me up in a cell by myself. But they got the rest of the crew that went out also. They were in there in individual cells too.
Were you able to communicate with them in any way?
No, not really. We tried to devise some communication that the pilot could tell who it was trying to talk to him, but I don't know, it just sound didn't go too well in that jail. So we never really communicated very well. Now, later on, after we got in jail, early evening, they sent word back to everybody in the cell. They had some coffee there that we could have. So they let us all out, and we went up to get some coffee. Now, I didn't drink coffee back then, and I got a cup of coffee. I hadn't drank any water, anything fluid all day, and we started off about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I drank a cup of that coffee, and that was terrible tasting stuff, but it was wet, so I benefited from that part of it. And I don't know if it was real coffee or what the Germans might have been making with it, but they offered us coffee to drink, and of course, all of us did, because we were in the same boat. You know, we hadn't had anything to drink all day. We didn't carry water on the plane because at that altitude, water freezes pretty good.
Yeah.
So we didn't take water up.
How long did you remain a prisoner of war?
It was only about a month and a half.
Only a month and a half. That's it.
Well, yeah. I always say, if there was anything good about it, I was only in there for a short period of time. The war, I believe the Germans knew the war was about over with, because they dealt with POWs kind of, they weren't rough with us or anything like that. And they didn't, the worst thing was they didn't have food for us to eat. Very little food.
Because there's so many different stories from so many different POWs and different experiences. So yours was captivity, but yours was not one of beatings and things of that nature every day or every other day, like we've heard for so many others.
The POWs in Korea and later on in Vietnam, they were truly rough on their POWs, as you've seen a lot of pictures or heard stories about them. They made no move to try to make us do anything, like hit you with a gun butt or something like that. They were just kind to us. And I was looking for the worst, you know, because I didn't know what might happen when I hit the ground.
Yeah.
And so and I think I've told you the story before. Well, I had an escape kit, and in that kit was a hacksaw blade and a compass and a map and some other things. I can't remember all of them, but anyhow, I put the hacksaw blade and the compass through a hole in my sleeve, and that flag, I cut a piece behind my collar there to stuff that flag down in there. Well, on my way up to Stalag 1, I got to thinking that when I get there, if they catch me with that stuff in my jacket, I might receive some severe punishment. So I fished it out and threw it out the window from the train when the guards weren't looking. And they didn't have a lot of guards that were guarding. I think really if we wanted to or tried, we might have been able to escape, but I wasn't about to try that.
So Stalag 1, month and a half. Talk to me about the day that you found out you were going to leave Stalag 1.
Well, we went to bed in early May one night, and the compound was made in compounds, so many people to compound, and these tall fences, and they had guard towers all around it and in between, and they had a tripwire around each place that if you stepped over that wire, you was subject to being shot. Well, I never saw anybody do that, and I wasn't about to test it in the first place. But that was And when we woke up the next morning on that night, all the guards were gone. They had taken off and headed to the American and British lines, which was more towards England. And the Russians were coming to liberate us the next day. And they did. I didn't see any of the Russians because our senior officers, colonels, had made arrangements with these Air Force. I'm sure they had radio stuff there to do it with, but they brought in B-17s because there was an airfield there at where the prison was, and loaded about 20 of us on each B-17 and flew us to back in France, near Le Havre, France. And they had set up a processing tent there to process us, because they figured their thought of us then is we were out of the military. So they processed us back into the military then, and stayed there a couple of weeks. And then a Navy ship was leaving from Le Havre to New York, and they put a bunch of us on it and got to New York. And they had this thing figured out pretty good. They had several trains set up to go in all directions to take the POWs home. And my train was headed south to Fort Smith, Arkansas, at an army post there. And they were, the medics were there, and they talked to us. If you had anything troubling you, a problem with you or anything, they were geared to take care of it very quick. And they did. I had a tooth that broke out here. Well, it was abscessed and they pulled it really. And I told him that I had that. And he says, we'll fix you up and you'll be ready to go tomorrow. He did.
Wow.
They fixed up a tooth for me, and I was ready to go.
So after all of this, CB, you serve, you are shot down, you bail out, you become a prisoner of war, you survive all of that, and then you make the decision to keep on serving this country for decades after that in what became ultimately the United States Air Force. I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you once again for your service for that. Why did you continue to stay in?
Doug, whenever I came back, there was a lot of people coming back from Europe and I guess Japan too. But anyway, jobs were not very plentiful. I found a job at a machine shop, which I had trained for some machine work, but they didn't pay hardly anything, and not enough really for my wife and I to live on. So I waited about 3 months, and I thought about it, going back in, and I talked it over with her, and I went back into the military, well, back into the Army then, and that was the beginning of 30 years in the Air Force. Whenever they separated the Air Force out of the Army, well, of course, I went with the Air Force. Now, whenever I went back in, the Air Force people wanted to assign me to a B-29 crew, which was one of the new planes back then.
Yeah.
I said no. I made it out of one plane that was shot out from under me, and I'm not going to fly missions anymore. So that's when they assigned me, and I knew nothing about what they assigned me to do, was public affairs work. And it had many names during that, public information and all that stuff. But I stayed with that then for the rest of my time in the military, and went on up to promotion in grades to the top Air Force grade, Chief Master Sergeant, for the last 10 years I was in. And, you know, there were times it was worse, sometimes it was good, but it was something that I learned to live with. My wife also, we raised 4 children, and We moved around some. It wasn't all that bad, but we did move around. And if I could back up to tell you about the food parcels that we got to eat.
Sure.
The Germans gave us boiled potatoes one time, 2 times, and some stew that I don't know what kind of meat was in it. But if you're hungry, you'll eat a lot of things. And then the International Red Cross brought parcels in that was made up for POWs. And one parcel, box about that long, about that deep, one parcel for one POW a week. Well, the Germans rationed them to us, and I could get whenever we got to that camp, they put 2 of us together because they didn't have a bed for us to sleep on, and this was an old dining hall, so they gave us a piece of cardboard and each of us a blanket, and we slept together in our clothes, and we shared the food parcels. And I didn't smoke, and there were cigarettes in the package, and I did like candy. And so you have seen this before. This is called a D-bar that was in there.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a semi-sweet chocolate. But to this day, I like semi-sweet chocolate. And of course, we had those until they came to fly us out. And as I was leaving the camp, then some guy, and I don't know who he was, had this old jacket here, and he says, "Perdue, is this your jacket?" And I could see it. And I said, "Yep, that's my jacket." So I brought that home with me. But that's the only way. And that was the identification tag that they gave everybody.
Stalag 1.
Stalag 1. And I have kept it all that time as just as a keepsake, you know. And but food was the worst thing there. They gave us what was called black bread, a piece about that thick. And if you sliced it pretty thin, you could eat it. But I found out the recipe for the bread in later years. And whenever I talk to groups and what have you, I tell them about the bread. And if you want a copy of the recipe, you're welcome to it, you know.
What's in it?
Mostly sugar beets, tree leaves, sawdust, and there's several other things in there.
Oh,
but it was, you know, like I said, if you're hungry, you'll eat a lot of things, and I would eat that if you could cut it thin enough, you could eat it. We give a piece about like that thick once a week. We get that, and the stuff that was in the package, various canned things, crackers and all that in the POW package that they give us.
You know, CB, through the decades and other conflicts, you know, there's been a lot of bad things when you talk about Vietnam and Korea and Iraq and Afghanistan. But my thanks always goes to men like you, who in a time when war was as basic as it could be, when you compare it to today's modern technology, and wars can be fought by guys sitting in an office somewhere with drones. I am always thankful for what all of you did, and curious, one of my last questions, if you truly understand the gravity of what all of you did. You know, it's common to say you guys changed the course of the world, but do you grasp the reality of that? Because Hitler was on a march, not just across Europe. Hitler wanted the world.
He did.
And in Europe, and in that campaign,
Mm-hmm.
all of you changed the course of someone who was steamrolling across an entire continent.
True. Yes, I grasped it quite well. I have never thought that a lot of people came back from the war, and nobody, I say nobody, most people that came back from the war won't talk about what they did.
I agree.
And I didn't for a long time. And Rachel got me to speak to her, I believe it was ninth grade class in Rockwall. And I was living in San Antonio, and she called me and asked me what I would do that. And I did. And then as time went on, well, she's sort of been my agent.
For years and years and years, as I share so many stories like yours, I have always said, and I will always say, history books are wonderful. I think everybody should educate themselves on how, in your case, your generation helped save the world. But at the same time, there is no better history than a living history and a conversation like we're having right here, to hear it from those firsthand who were there. I would much rather have this conversation that we have had for the last hour instead of reading it in a book.
Well, I agree with you that way. And when Karen introduced that piece that you did for me years ago, when it was over with, I don't know who she was talking to there, but she said, "Can you believe that?" And, she did an excellent job of introducing it. And then at the end of it, it amazed her that there was somebody that did that or could do that. So,
I can tell you that, CB, we're all amazed at what all of you did, because, as you say, it wasn't about individuals. It wasn't about this guy's a hero. It was about a collective effort where everybody was all in, and you had everybody else's back, and they knew that they had your back. And
sure.
It was the collective effort of all of you at the ages of 19 and 20, and some I know snuck in at 18 and maybe 17.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for the conversation. I can't thank you enough for the living history and sharing your time. And I'm going to leave it with one last question for you.
Yes,
at the ripe young age of 95,
yeah.
Looking back and reflecting on all that you've done and the 30 years of service to this country, what does freedom mean to you, CB Perdue?
Doug, I've got a statement that an ex-prisoner of war during the Persian Gulf War, a guy by the name of David Eberly, he was a prisoner in the Persian Gulf, as I said, and he said this, which actually fits it about as good as any of them. I usually use this at the end of all of my talks that I give. That he said, freedom, it doesn't matter if you've lost it for 5 minutes, 5 years, or 50 years. We have an appreciation that other people will never understand. And I think there's lots of people in that category that don't understand the freedom that you get when you got relieved out of that prison camp, or out of anywhere you've been in prison and you can't talk to anybody or what have you. To me, it gives you really something to think about. And I seldom ever get into there's not many times that I don't think about it. At night, I go to bed and things are kind of quiet or something, I'll think about it. I think about those 4 guys that didn't get out of my plane that day, the 2 in particular, the tail gunner and the bow turret gunner. I have sincerely enjoyed, I see you on Facebook a lot, and I followed you on a lot of things that's on there, and I'm amazed that I've met such a guy with the talents that you've got.
But this conversation is in no way about me, my friend. I will simply say that I am honored to know you. I'm honored to call you friend, even though we haven't seen each other face to face for a while, COVID and all of that stuff. But no greater generation, in my opinion. What you guys did collectively was amazing. And a man like you to share the living history with all of us to understand better what things were like. I thank you. I honor you. And I will be thinking about you on Veterans Day, my friend.
And I appreciate that too, you know.
Well, it takes a willing partner to share a story. And as we discussed earlier, so many who did what you did aren't okay talking about it. And the fact that you're willing to sit and share living history means a lot to me. It'll mean a lot to people who are going to watch this.
Well, that's good.
Understanding and keep the story passed down to generations.
Yeah.
CB, I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you, and I really thank you for this. That first story you did, I don't know how many times I've played that over and over. I've got it on my recorder, and I'll listen to it. Sometimes it breaks a tear. But
it does.
I like to do it.
I have to tell you, it is an honor to have documented your first trip back in a B-17, realizing that the last time you had been in one was when you bailed out and you were almost 20,000 feet over enemy territory.
Right.
I'm honored, my friend. Thank you for sharing your story, CB.
Well, you're quite welcome. I'm happy to do it.
You are an American hero, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you.